You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right. Every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here to help us through the show. But as we do when we're Han Solo, we've got a preview of some upcoming Talking Headways episodes that you all will be excited about. Also, I'm really sorry for not doing a show 2 weeks ago. I try to get these things in every few weeks, but I got really busy and I just couldn't muster up the energy to get a show in. So I'll stay on schedule in the future, I promise, and I'll have some guests coming up soon as well. I've already got one somewhat confirmed. I don't want to say it because then I'll jinx it, but hopefully in the next couple episodes, we'll have some folks joining us. Also, we've got some great shows coming up on Talking Headways, so I'm really excited for you to hear all of those as well. We chatted recently with Setha Lowe about her book, Why Public Space Matters, so that will be out soon. We also chatted with Michael Salisbury from the Denver program that is, giving everybody e-bikes, the discounts and the rebates and stuff, and that was a fun discussion, and I know a lot of folks want to hear from that, especially that topic and that program, so really cool to get to chat with them. Also, we've got a May the 4th Star Wars program that we finally recorded after several years of trying. I think I mentioned on the first show of the year that it was one of my goals to get a show like this out. And so my good friend Jeff Munowich is joining, and we'll talk about the 5 transportation modes and the 5 cities in Star Wars that I think are the most exciting, most interesting. So even if you're not a Star Wars fan, you might enjoy it, and some of the ideas brought forward by Science Fantasy. We've also got the president of Zipcar coming on the show. I talked to him last Thursday. We had a great chat with Megan Kana at LA Metro and Scarlett DeLeon of ACT LA, which is currently on the Impact podcast, formerly Revolution, of course. So check that one out over there if you get a chance, if you're jonesing for some Talking Headways content and need it right away. There's a lot of stuff to be had on the Impact podcast that we usually post here, about a month later after it comes out there. So if you want it right away, go check out that show. It's really great. And the topics that we have are great, and the guests are really great. And this one specifically is really good. It's about women riding transit. And also we have got Justin Hollander is coming on the show to talk about his book, The First City on Mars, and Ben Wilson is coming on the show to talk about his book, Urban Jungle. So lots of other stuff in the works, but hopefully these are exciting topics and keep everyone coming back. We just finished the one with WRI and the low emissions delivery zones, zero emissions delivery zones, I should say, the ZZ, which was really fun to talk with Hamilton about that. And then some of the other shows we've had recently have been really great too. So go check those out if you get a chance. If you haven't already, really appreciate you all listening to this show, but also listening to the Talking Headways show on Thursdays. We have a lot of fun talking with the guests, and it's certainly fun sharing it with you all as well. So thanks to everybody who has been ordering bus and bike scarves. We really appreciate it. And if you'd like to order, go to theoverheadwire.com. Or if you want to order 5 or more, you get a 10% discount. Email me, theoverheadwire@gmail.com. People are still ordering them, even though we're getting close to kind of the summer months, which I think it's a little bit harder to sell scarves during those months. But at the same time, you can get them before fall. You'll have them in time for fall this time. It's not quite cold out anymore, but you can get your scarves at theoverheadwire.com. There is one summer scarf though. There's the bike only scarf that is a little lighter weight for the warmer weather climates. So the sublimated one with the checkerboard on it. Hopefully folks enjoy that one. It's not quite as hot as the 2 other ones. So check it out if you get a chance. Also, don't forget to order any of the books we've covered on our show on our bookshop site, bookshop.org/the overhead wire. Man, I don't know. I'm messing that up. Bookshop slot. I'm going to keep this in. I'm not going to edit this out. Bookshop.org/shop/the overhead wire. And I do want to note that Bookshop doesn't carry every book that we've talked about. There's 2 actually I know of that we don't cover, but everything else. So if you heard us recently chat with Trevor Latimer about his book Small Isn't Beautiful. That's in there. And also Seth Lowe's book is going to be there when we publish her piece as well in a couple of weeks. So definitely go check that out, get you some books. And we have put up together a pretty great list of all the books that we've reviewed and all the authors we've talked to over the last 10 years or so. And so that's really exciting. I can't believe that, 10 years. We started this podcast in 2013 with Tanya, and crazy. Talking Headways is 10 years old. Bonkers. That's so long. Also, we've designed a new shirt or a mug or sticker or poster, whichever one you want to get. Cars Are Cholesterol. We're selling them at TeePublic, bit.ly/Cars Are Cholesterol. And as I always recommend, you should get the purple one. Okay, this is episode 130. We are in session. So 130 episodes, that's crazy, of this show. And then there's 430 of the Talking Headways show. So it's like 560 episodes where you're listening to us. Really great to have everybody on for so long. I appreciate it. But before we get to the show, I want to let folks know where you can get this podcast or Talking Headways, wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And it's awesome because most of you all here, I don't advertise this show too much. So if you're here, you're probably on the podcatcher, and I really appreciate that. So thanks so much. Okay, here's the news. This is the part you were actually probably waiting for, I think, the most. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter of the last few weeks and the newsletter. And since we didn't do a show 2 weeks ago, we're going to cover a little bit more ground today, I think, but we'll try to keep it interesting and exciting. And I probably won't go, hopefully I won't go on too long on any given subject, but we'll cover the top stories from the newsletter. Also, I want to let you all know that basically this comes from about 480 interesting stories that we've actually sent to our subscribers. So we're just doing a couple of them here, obviously, but there are so many more in the newsletter. And I hope that if folks are interested in the news that we're sharing here and you want more, then, basically what I do in my work is that I go and work for about 7-8 hours a day, pulling the news, organizing it, categorizing it, and then I put it on the newsletter for the readers the next day. And so it takes maybe 10 minutes to skim tops to go through and see what's going on. So I do about 8 hours of work so that you only have to do about 10 minutes of work. So that's my value add there. I pulled together the stuff I think is interesting, and hopefully you find interesting as well on those topics. So no credit card needed, just an email address. Go to theoverheadwire.com to sign up, and you can get the premium newsletter like everybody else. And we've been doing it for a long time. We've been doing it since 2006, way before all those other other newsletters out there. So check it out if you get a chance. This is where that stuff comes from. Okay, let's start. Donut art clashes with zoning laws. On the blank space above a front door of his bakery in Conway, New Hampshire, owner Sean Young had art students paint a colorful mural full of donuts and pastries. But the happy painting became the target of the city's zoning board and started a debate about free speech. Free sweets would be great. Free speech and what constitutes art versus advertising. Young has sued the city, saying the rules discriminate based on the speaker's identity and the content of the speech. This was by Kathy McCormick and Robert Buakti in the Associated Press. If you look at the picture, and we'll have a link to the article and all the articles in the show notes like we always do, it's really, really well done. And it sure could be mistaken for advertising, I guess, but it looks like it fits the building and it fits the area. I don't know, but it feels like it's not causing anybody any problems. And so this is my kind of pitch to say that a lot of zoning rules on signs and things like that are really dumb. Now, I get what they're trying to keep from happening, which is like that interchange feel, side of the road, ridiculous amount of wires and McDonald's signs and all that stuff you see when you're passing something on the highway. But this is not that at all. This is just a mural on the side of a building, and it just happens to be donuts, and it's pretty, and it's fun, and this is so dumb that they come down hard on this stuff and they regulate this stuff, and it keeps, they want to keep and maintain the character, but this is the type of stuff that creates character. So that just drives me nuts. A lot of zoning rules are really dumb. And like I said, I get what they're trying to do, but it just makes messes like this one. And so you're going to have this fight on free speech ground on the First Amendment over a mural that some kids painted of a donut. And it's really dumb because it's a fun picture. It conveys kind of the situation going on with that store. Of course, that's kind of, I guess, can be construed as advertising, but it's also just fun. It's just fun. And so I think there's a lot of like zoning boards and design review and all that stuff that just tries to take away fun and new and interesting. And I think people are conservative in that way a lot of times, small c conservative, in that they're just like, they're just very against change, and it's frustrating. So go take a look at the picture. Let me know what you think. I think it's cool. I think it should stay. But I guess I'm not the target of the zoning law. Okay. Cars deprive us of time. Americans spend a lot of their time in cars, but it doesn't have to be this way, argues Doug Gordon. In order to get rid of some of the time suck of driving, we must reduce the distances between important destinations, which is at the heart of the 15-minute city idea developed by Carlos Moreno. While this particular phrasing of planning for proximity has received a lot of attention, it also is central to how cities have been planned and organized for millennia. This was by Doug Gordon in The New Republic. Doug Gordon has a good piece about how we got to where we are in the 15-minute city conspiracy theory, and starts out discussing, wasted time in driving and in getting to places. But I was a bit disappointed he didn't spend more words on living in a world dictated by clocks. At the end of the year, we posted a few articles, and I think I mentioned probably some of them on the show, about the idea of time and how cities like Barcelona are actually rethinking their relationship to time and to the clock, which is really interesting to think about how you plan to save people time, because time is very valuable to people. You can't say time is money. I mean, that is a cliche, but time is valuable to people. And so whether work from home for white-collar workers has opened up a new dimension of value and worth that they might not have known existed before for this thing that they call time, we might also talk about how long it takes to get somewhere, or the mental pain of waiting for a bus to come, even why people choose the car because of perceived time savings or a feeling of being in control. But what about the time it takes to build something? What about all the agonizing time spent at public meetings? And does this negate the amount of time people will save or won't save when any given transportation project is finished? So I would say time is measurable, but it means different things to different people. Some say time is money, and it's a bad cliche, but it may have even a greater desirability. And I was thinking about this the other day. I have like 80 to 100 Christmases in my lifetime, right? Like, that's a really fun time of year that I really enjoy spending with my family. And I only have a certain amount of days in this lifetime. But why waste any of them on any of these long, boring meetings where people fight about stuff all the time? And I feel like, this is kind of strong wording, but they're basically stealing from us. And when it takes 10 years to build a transit project, they're stealing from all the people that would have saved time writing it. So we take all this time and we think we're doing good. And what happens is they're just taking time from everybody to create something that will benefit a few people. And I don't know, for some reason, that just popped in my head, feeling like time was stolen away by projects that aren't built fast enough, or by all these public meetings where people stand up and say they weren't consulted, even though the project planning has been going on for 10 years. And so if you give those people credence, they're just wasting our time, but also the people who are allowing it are wasting our time as well. And that's frustrating. And so, it takes too long. And so we need to rethink our relationship with time and how cities interact with it. I know that this is what Doug was leaning into a little bit, but I feel like we should kind of go deeper into that idea of time and planning and what this means for humans and how they live. And I'll come back to that time piece, I think, in a little bit, but I just think it's frustrating. But it's also an interesting idea to think about what time means for planning, what time means for transportation, because I think we all feel it. And we all felt it because of the pandemic, when a lot more people were able to work from home. Now, again, that's like a lot of white collar and very upper class people got to work from home, but it also, maybe got them to kind of rejigger their mental clocks a little bit and say, oh, we were spending this 2 hours commuting every day. And while it might have been some time that we enjoyed, if you're on a train or a bus, you can read or hang out or whatever. But then if you get two extra hours at home where you're not commuting, what do you do with that time? I think people started to realize, oh, there's this time that we're not, taking advantage of because we've settled into this rut of working and driving and going places. So anyways, I think it's interesting. We should think about it more. Okay, next up is two articles that are kind of connected. In-person government services are shrinking. As the public sector retains hybrid work schedules, many in-person services, like the issuing of licenses and permits, are only available by appointment in some cities. The reasons are not from lack of funding, but rather because many cities have been slow to lift pandemic-era rules in an effort to keep workers who have been in high demand happy. The lack of human interaction has been frustrating for many, especially when computer programs often can't answer questions and are hard to navigate. This was by Alec McGillis in ProPublica, and I'm going to read this next one because I think it's related. Remote work could increase the costs of government. Remote work is taking off as many employees and some employers prefer the arrangement and the reduced costs, but for the public sector, remote work is a benefit that only some enjoy. Daniel DeSalvio and Michael Hartney argue because of employees' value of hybrid workplace, it could cost governments more to require full in-person work when union contracts are negotiated. This was in governing. So I think this work from home thing in the public sector is really interesting because ultimately it does help when you're able to talk to somebody when you go to a permitting office. If you say, I want this, this, and this, and then somebody can say, well, this only works in this instance, and this only works in this instance. And it's not something necessarily that computer program could provide. I mean, maybe like some crazy AI thing in like 50,000 years could do that. But at the moment, that doesn't exist. So it's kind of crazy that all of these kind of work from home things are dictating how kind of public sector interactions with the public actually work. And so it's just, I found these two things interesting because, basically it's so valuable to be able to work from home because of that time component that the unions are going to negotiate to keep some of that time. But then also staying away from the offices are actually, maybe impacting the level of services that people can get from their government, whether that's permitting or whatever else. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. And it's interesting to think how governments are going to have to rethink how they deal with this time component again, right? People working from home or being in the office and being able to interact with people. And so maybe some of them actually benefit because they aren't stressed and they can get more work done because they aren't having to interact with people. But then other people can't get their work done because they can't get the permits they need or can't get the approvals that they need from the city. So it's an interesting kind of loop, and I'm interested to read more about it in the future. But it's something that I think we should be watching for because it is this time change that's come from the pandemic that I think people are paying more attention to. What Lyft's decline means for bike share systems. Since 2018, the ride-hailing company Lyft has invested heavily in bike share systems and operations. Lyft runs the 8 largest bike share networks in the country, including Capital Bike Share in the Washington region, and also owns a national bike share equipment provider. But Lyft hasn't recovered from the pandemic at the same pace as competitor Uber, and Alyssa Walker wonders whether the future of bike shares around the country might look like. This was by Alyssa Walker in Curbed, and so this actually article came out before Lyft announced the other day that they were actually laying off 1,200 people, and so I think that's telling that she could kind of see the future. But really, I wonder what would happen to bike share. I imagine that some of them would be subsumed by city agencies, transportation agencies, or transit agencies. If Lyft or Uber disappeared, they wouldn't really. I think they'd just be rebranded as some other taxi company, or you'd probably end up paying more. And I think part of this is these companies stole progress from sustainable mobility over time. And I think now that bike share is all tied up in Lyft, it's kind of tethered to it. It's the sustainable mobility and the micromobility is kind of tethered to these companies because they're not in they're systems that are something that was created by VCs and then adopted by VCs and not necessarily by the public interest in a lot of cases anyways. And so you've seen a lot of them disappear even. So something that you think is going to be there one day might not be there the next. And so, I think that what would happen to some of the larger ones that are very valuable, like New York's system, they'd probably be subsumed into the MTA or something like that, or even the New York City Transportation Department. But a lot of them might disappear as well. And so I think this is interesting to look at what actually that means if a company like Lyft, which owns a lot of the infrastructure and production of bike share, what would happen? And I think that was an interesting thing to look at. The first all-electric city. In the winter of 2018, Ithaca, New York, passed its own version of the Green New Deal and started moving to decarbonize 6,000 residential and commercial buildings, which make up 40% of the city's emissions. To do this, Ithaca entered into a public-private partnership with Block Power, a clean tech startup, to retrofit the buildings. The city hopes to meet its goal of net zero emissions by 2030. What was interesting about this was that they can actually they were able to retrofit the buildings of the public sector, but then also they had this buying power from getting so many appliances and things at scale that they could actually turn over a lot of residential as well. So if you can buy like not just one appliance, but you can buy like thousands of appliances, you get them at a deep discount, a 20, 30% discount. And so what happens is you can decarbonize faster because you're doing it in bulk, which is really a fascinating piece for this article. It's interesting that Ithaca wants to become the first all-electric city, but what's also interesting is kind of the bulk buying power of decarbonization and thinking about it that way. And I think that is some of the thinking behind also the Inflation Reduction Act and a lot of the subsidies that come from that for electrification of, say, getting solar panels or getting hot water pumps, hot water heaters, with their heat pumps, those types of things. So very interesting to think about that. Okay. Paris banned cars on some roads. How's it working out? Car trips have declined by 60% since 2001 in the heart of Paris, the largest metropolitan region in the European Union. The changes have been happening for a while, but Mayor Anne Hidalgo has taken the most credit as she enters her 9th year in the role. As a new low-emission zone is set to take effect with parking restrictions and changes in street design, merchants who have seen reduced business and suburbanites who drive are complaining the most. This was by Henry Grabar in Slate. Henry was trying to be, I think, egalitarian and, kind of figure out, the both sides of the issue and some of the commercial interests and stores in the city that need deliveries and those types of things. But at the end, it seemed like most of the complaints about car-free Paris is about the same thing that's about housing, right? It's the, basically the restrictions that cause prices of housing to go up are creating in neighborhoods that are basically exclusive because of who can afford to get in. And so this is like kind of a halfway complaint about the exclusivity of Paris and how they're excluding people from other parts of the region from a housing perspective. But it also kind of floats over in their discussions about the car-free zone. And I think the car-free zone is really interesting, and I think the pace at which they've been able to do it is great. But I also don't think that you should be, kind of listening to the suburbanites that are complaining about it, especially when you can still get around the city. There's ways to do it, but it's going to be safer overall. It's going to be a better system. Obviously, you're going to need to have delivery vehicles and trucks to do bigger and larger, jobs. But at the same time, I just don't quite understand just why we continue to have these arguments about, whether it's fair to certain people or not, about, cutting back on automobile usage in big cities that have good transit, they have good access by bike, they have good, access for even delivery vehicles and things like that. And you're probably going to get, zero emissions delivery zones and those types of things. And you're probably going to see a lot more cargo bikes. And some things can't be delivered by cargo bike, obviously, but then you also have this safety issue for people living in the center city and, frankly, the emissions and pollution issue from all, not just, because if it does turn electric, you're still going to have car, tire, and brake dust pollution as well. So these heavy, big vehicles coming into large cities that weren't even designed for it initially, it's actually going to be a net benefit. So I think Henry did a good job writing the piece, and I really appreciate the story he's telling. But I also think that it's a lot of complaining by suburbanites who feel like that they kind of deserve to get into the city, even if they can get there in other ways. Okay, next piece. How cars are connected to social justice. In their book, Cars and Jails, Freedom, Dreams, Debt, and Carcerality, Julie Livingston and Andrew Ross write about how cars connect a lot of other social justice issues, including incarceration, debt, and surveillance. As they started out doing their research on incarceration and debt specifically, Livingston and Ross found that many of these issues of race and capitalism were connected by the requirement of driving for participation in American life. And this was in public books. I really like this one. This might be one of my best reads of the week. And if you have one article that you're going to go click on in the show notes to go read, I think this one should be it. Basically, they started out not thinking about transportation much, if at all, but they found that the car and kind of the requirement of driving actually links everything that they were talking about when it comes to, race and incarceration and other things. So I have a couple of quotes from the interview because I think you should just go read the interview instead of listening to my take on it. But the first one is, moreover, if you're a car owner, you are red meat for whoever wants to prey upon you, whether it's the police, auto lenders, or state agencies interested in extracting data about your conduct. You are the object of predation and you have no choice. In our interviews for the book, we can see clearly that people's credit scores, their loan opportunities, their vulnerability to fees and fines captured by the state as they are all driving. All of those things are calibrated in one way or another to the racial structure of American society. So cars are tied up in status, right? Like if you have a nice car and people will look at you a certain way, if you drive a certain car and it costs a lot of money, you can tell how much people make. It's kind of people's, their cloaks. Can't always tell when, here in San Francisco, especially if people are wearing something, whether they're rich, but you can tell by what car somebody's driving generally if they have a lot of money. And so I feel like they're tied up in a lot of kind of stories about yourself, and you tell a story by what kind of car you buy and those types of things. But it's also something that police and others use to kind of profile. And there are also lots of surveillance issues related to that. So the interview is really interested in talking about this, and I'm sure the book's interesting. I wish I read it. It actually came out, I think, last fall or maybe even earlier than that. So it's something that I missed, and maybe I should get it and read it and talk to these folks. It would be really fascinating. But basically, everything kind of revolves around the car, and it's tied to the car, whether it's parking tickets or whether it's the ability to stop somebody and get their information, or even fines and fees and all those things. And it just kind of ties everything together, and you can be monitored by how you pay off fines and things for your car. So it's just really fascinating to read that piece in the interview that they gave. And also, they also end up saying that transportation justice could be a connection point for a lot of social movements, and I don't necessarily disagree. One thing that they said at the end is kind of really interesting as well. They said we have social movements in each of these arenas. We have housing for all, we have college for all, we have Medicare for all, but we don't have transportation for all yet. And I think that's really interesting. I think some folks are thinking that they have that cornered, whether it's the free transit movement or other movements out there. But I don't know if we actually have a transportation for all kind of movement the way we have those other things. Maybe those other things are a little bit simpler in the way that you frame them, but also they're complicated as well. Dang, somebody driving by real fast on a motorcycle. Okay, how buses alleviate unemployment and poverty. This was a research paper. Clayton County, Georgia, terminated bus service in between 2010 and 2015. This enabled researchers to measure economic outcomes related to the loss of service. They found a strong causal relationship between decreased bus service access and increased unemployment and poverty. This was by Fei Li and Christopher Wachelkowski. Sorry, Christopher. Urban Studies Journal abstract, and I have a link to the full paper as well, which I'll link in the show notes too. Interesting, because basically they had a case where you could tell before and after transit was ended how people's job prospects and employment prospects and poverty prospects were. And so it actually is connected. And I think this is true in all places where the bus really does provide access to a lot of opportunities and necessary requirements. As we said before in the previous article, the car is a necessary thing in a lot of American society and is, basically mandatory to a lot of folks. And it makes sense that if you take away the last kind of vestige of a service that gets people to where they need to go, whether it's a job or, or the hospital or things like that, then it would really impact the way that their lives are lived if they don't have access to a car. So this makes a lot of sense, and it's connected to that previous article, I think, about social justice and automobiles and how they're connected to everything. And so if you take away bus service, you also take away people's ability to access public life. Fixing the woes of transit requires focus. The pandemic has reduced transit ridership and crippled transit funding mechanisms, creating a looming fiscal cliff for transit agencies. To save them, David Zipper argues that transit agencies need to have a singular focus on transit service that gets people riding again, ignoring other issues such as bus electrification, crime, and free fares that he says distracts from the main vision. This was by David Zipper in Vox. I disagree with David on this one, and I feel like I've found myself disagreeing with him on a lot of things lately, and I don't understand that whole transit isn't a public good Harvard debate argument he had recently. Jim Aloisi sets that one straight in Commonwealth Magazine for me. But anyways, no, we can't ignore the homelessness and drugs on transit. I've seen more crazy stuff on transit in the last few years than I've seen in the previous decade. And I saw some really crazy stuff because I rode transit so much. You always come across something. Most trips are pretty easy and nothing really happens, but there's some times when you see some real stuff out there. And so I've seen more in the last year or two riding BART and Muni than I had before. And so I don't think you can ignore that just to focus on transit service. I think, you can't ignore the homelessness and you can't ignore all the social issues. Now, do I think transit agencies are responsible for those things? No. Do I think that it keeps transit riders away that some of those things are happening? Yes. I think that's the frustrating part about being an advocate and being, having transit be that place of last resort for a lot of people. But you can't just think about, those things in a vacuum. And I realize that's not his main argument, but also, thinking about a bus electrification as well as free transit, I think are his main targets. But I also think that as I agree that free service can be positive, and as I agree that transit service and better service overall is a net benefit for transit agencies, I don't think you can take away all the things that transit agencies are made to focus on. Do I wish that transit agencies could just focus on ridership and driving ridership through increased service? Yes. I would agree on that point, but I don't think that you can separate all those other things because they are tied to how people feel in their bones about transit at the moment. So I think his general idea is important. I think we should focus on service, and we should talk about why service is important. But we can also do other things. I mean, I've said this many times, and I'll say it again. One highway project in the U.S. is equal to the transit capital for the whole country, how much money we outlay for the whole country for capital projects. Now, I understand that's just like one of those kind of examples that just kind of shows the overall issue, that how much money we're spending on automobile infrastructure is way more than we're spending on transit infrastructure. And we need to spend more money on transit service, which is a different pot of money, obviously. But it just goes to show you how much money we put into other modes of transportation versus the one that actually, as we found out in the previous article, actually gives people access to the places where they need to go. And if more frequent service actually gives them more access to more places that they need to go and, brings up people's quality of life. So yes, let's do better service. Let's get people where they want to go, but you also need money to do that. And so it's annoying that we're pitting bus electrification versus service. We're pitting free transit versus service. I saw a chart recently that showed how much money, I think it was Ray LaHood, and he was, arguing for a high-speed rail. We've spent like $10 billion on high-speed rail from a federal funding perspective. We spent trillions and trillions of dollars on roads, and people say, oh, well, high-speed rail doesn't work. It's not. It's like, that doesn't make any sense because you haven't invested in it. I think the first thing we need to do if we're going to have this discussion about service and about free transit and crime and all those other things, I think we need to talk about why we aren't replacing all the really lame board members that don't understand why service is important. I think that's the basic thing. So yes, agencies should focus on service, but I think that a lot of board members don't get that. And so they're going to focus and think about a lot of these other things that we should think about. And if the feds are going to give us money, capital dollars that we're we may never get again. Who knows? We got lucky with this time with the infrastructure bill in the Inflation Reduction Act. Like if we're going to have this money to spend on electric buses that are really important for the future of the country, then we should try to spend them. And then we can learn about what they're good at and what they're bad at. That's another thing is like we can't learn about a technology unless we try it out first. And so if you wait for other people to be guinea pigs in this respect, you're not going to be able to get it right the next time. I feel like I've said this before because in Shenzhen, China, they have had several iterations of electric buses, and they finally figured out how it works. And in Austin, they're actually working on that as well, like what works in terms of electric buses. So we should be investing in some of this technology while also investing in service. But we need to also get, like I said, these lame board members that don't understand why service is important. Maybe they should, get a refresher course on that. We also need to hammer chunks of money off the state highway department and the federal funding through flexible funding that, is going to spend money on these things that, we don't need to spend money on. We just spent, I think I saw the Streets Blog SF article talking about how we spent $600 million expanding the 101 freeway, and the congestion's worse because we know about induced demand. We spent $1 billion expanding a highway through LA, and basically it's full again, and it's not really working the way that it was intended. They were hoping that if they expanded the highway, it would free flow traffic more often, but that's not the case. That's not how transportation works. Everybody knows that. So anyways, I agree. We do need to have more service. We need to talk about service more. We need to talk about why service is important and why frequency of service is important. We need trains and buses to come every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes, instead of every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes. And actually, BART actually figured out a way today, apparently, to increase their service by, tweaking a few things here and there. So they changed service from 30 minutes on the weekends to 20 minutes, which makes a huge difference. So having 3 trains an hour instead of 2 trains an hour is a big difference. And so those things are the things we need to talk about. And so people like Rebecca Saltzman at BART get that, but other board members don't seem to, and they don't even ride transits. They don't even know what the problem is. I feel like that's part of the problem too. They have no idea. They've never had to wait for a bus. And that time component that I was talking about in one of the first articles comes back again. If you don't feel the pain of time, you're not going to fix the time, right? You're not going to see it as something that needs to be fixed. You're just going to see the bus come by as empty and say, oh, well, that nobody's riding that bus, so we need to cut it even more, rather than saying, oh, that bus is empty. Why is that? Oh, well, maybe it's only coming once an hour, and so people don't see it as useful. When if it came every 15 minutes, it would be more useful to people. So those are the types of things I think we need to be talking about. We need to get those board members on some of these agencies on board and not have this really silly internal discussion about, whether transit is a public good or whether we're pitting all these things against each other. We should have all these discussions and make sure that we're making the choices that actually get us to where we want to go, which is not falling off that fiscal cliff. So maybe we're on the same page on one thing, but maybe we disagree about how to get there. Okay, a couple of bonus items here. Utah Senator Mitt Romney is most certainly not a fan of the e-bike bill circulating around Congress. His quotes are quite illuminating and make me wonder how many other people think free flow traffic is more environmentally friendly than riding a bike. After all those years of DOTs putting the same type of comment in environmental reports, perhaps it sinks into people's minds. I look forward to Senator Romney's transit bill, since he said people should take transit if they can't afford a car or an e-bike. His quote here is specifically revealing. I'm not going to spend money on buying e-bikes for people like me who have bought them. They're expensive. Removing automobile lanes to put bike lanes is, in my opinion, the height of stupidity. It means more cars backing up, creating more emissions. That's obviously a dumb take by Senator Romney. Also, you're giving people $7,500 in rebates for electric cars. So why not a $500 rebate for an electric bike? So you can give people, basically 6 people or 7 people a rebate instead of just one person a rebate. Something like that. Also, your comments about bike lanes and stuff don't make any sense anyway. And there's emissions reductions in bikes, whether there's 2 lanes or 1 lane, etc. So anyways, frustrating. Next up, people in England have become more concerned about wild toileting, also known as public urination, as more public restrooms were shut down during the pandemic. The problem has grown. This was in The Guardian. People are peeing everywhere after sporting events and things like that. We need public restrooms. I mean, we don't need them to cost $1.7 million. They can probably cost $10,000. Even that seems expensive to me. But we need to have places for people to go to the restroom so they're not doing it on the street. That's my opinion. The weight and size of vehicles is starting to get some attention from federal policymakers as well as engineers. In England, many parking garages were built in the 1960s and 70s when cars were much lighter. Engineers worry that the increased weight of electric vehicles could collapse garages that are in poor condition and lack maintenance. So this article was written, and then a couple days later, a garage collapse is in New York, and people are blaming the really heavy SUVs that are on top of it. I think that's telling that somebody actually predicted that was going to happen. Not really, but unfortunate too, because somebody died in that garage, which is sad. But I think this is a real problem we're going to see, is these really heavy batteries creating heavy vehicles because people need to go, a certain amount of miles in their cars. And also just the size of the vehicles too. They're getting really huge. We'll probably talk about this next show because I have some articles out today that are going to be in the kind of this the cycle for the next show. But it's just frustrating to see something predicted almost, and something like that happen. And we're getting these heavy vehicles, and they're more danger to pedestrians, they're more danger to cyclists. And I don't know if they need to be that big, or that heavy even. Maybe the heaviness of them is even more of a problem, because then you're having more weight behind it, and so people are shielding themselves in large cars, and it's unfortunate. Okay, a couple more left. A new study published in the journal Nature Sustainability found that enriched people's water use is driving drought and water excess conditions in cities. In Cape Town, which got close to having no water, the richest 14% of the population used 51% of the water. I think this is the case in most places. I think in California they found out who the rich people were that were actually wasting water during the last drought, and it was not pretty, not pretty at all. Survey of residents that live near Barcelona's superblocks have some positive news for other cities trying to replicate the famous street designs. Respondents reported getting more rest, hearing less noise, and more socialization. This was in Politico EU. I think there's always going to be benefits of those superblocks. Let's get them here in the US. Let's see them here so we get more benefits. In Japan, over 10 million homes sit empty in rural areas, leaving opportunities for those who feel less tethered to cities to find and renovate traditionally designed homes. With the Japanese population dropping, interest is also growing from people in the United States. I just found this was an interesting piece in the New York Times about these empty homes, and some of them traditionally built, like you'd imagine a Japanese house to look like, and people are restoring them. But I can't even imagine that there's 10 million empty homes in rural areas. That's crazy. I guess the population is just not repopulating itself as fast as it should, and they have really extreme immigration laws there too, which keep people out from other countries. So it's really interesting to see how that's happening, and then just kind of the drop in the amount of people that are on the island, and that means more houses are available, and some of them are in really interesting houses that should be renovated or fixed, and some of them are probably going to go the way of the dodo. Okay, finally, Bergen, Norway has just completed the world's longest bike tunnel at 1.8 miles. Nestled in the fjords with incredibly steep mountains, the passage is the escape tunnel for a parallel tram line. Instead of just building a small passage, they decided to make it into a walking and biking tunnel. This is in CNN Travel. What a great idea to make your rescue line just a walk and bike tunnel that gets people between the two places where the tram would go. That's really fascinating and fun too. I love Bergen. It's such a great town. If you ever get a chance to go check out the fjords, it's beautiful, super beautiful. It rains a lot there, but it's super nice, and I hope people get a chance to see it. But that's really cool that they built that hike and bike trail inside of the mountain. That was the escape route for people that might have gotten trapped on the tram. Could be the other way around too. Interesting. Okay, well, thank you all for listening. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without you, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, and we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month will get you some stickers, and $10 a month will get you one of our scarves. Thank you so much, everybody, for being Patreons. It's really helpful. And I know we've put up ads recently, and those help us keep kind of the lights on as well. But the Patreons have really been supporting us ever since we started, doing the support through Patreon for a few years now, and really do appreciate it. It helps me, pay Sophia for doing the editing, and it helps us kind of keep this thing going each week for the Talking Headways podcast, as well as doing the Monday show. So Patreons, I really, really appreciate you. You guys keep this going, and it's awesome that you keep listening and you keep supporting, and I really do think it's awesome, and I appreciate it so much. Okay. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. And finally, puppies and butterflies. This is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. So I'm sad that The Mandalorian is over, but we'll have a talk on May the 4th about Star Wars a little bit more, and then we'll have some more stuff coming out in terms of television. Obviously it's baseball season, so I can watch some of those games on the weekends. It's the NBA playoffs are happening now, which big Warriors fan, so really appreciate that because it's kind of a good escape and getaway when they're playing. And then also just, kind of relaxing on the weekends and hanging out with family. And it's been nice to do that and kind of get some rest as well. And I might take a couple of days off and coming up in a few weeks just for kicks because I might need it. That'd be a good thing too. But I'm really looking forward to this May the 4th episode of Talking Headways, actually, with Jeff Munowich. And that's coming up. And so we're going to have a blast. It's going to be a kind of a longer episode, but we'll talk Star Wars. And I'll finally get to talk Star Wars in more detail as it relates to cities. And I won't do it too much because I know that it's not everybody's jam, but I do really like it and it makes it fun. So, yeah. You can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. You can find me on Mastodon at The Overhead Wire at sfba.social. Thanks for joining Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. Thank you all a lot. We really do appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Talking Mondays.